Good morning. We'll start with next important component, that is a cell wall. So in our syllabus we have to start with we have started with the structure of cell. In the next part we have discussed the cytoplasmic matrix and the third important component of cell, that is cell wall. So in today's lecture we are going to discuss the morphology, structure and function of cell wall. Now this cell wall is important component of cell as it provides protection around the cell. So the cell start with the cell wall. Next to cell wall there is plasma membrane, then the cytoplasmic matrix, and in the cytoplasmic matrix we have the different types of cell organelles and the cytoplasmic matrix with its own physical and chemical properties. Now it is the protective covering around the cell and is positioned next to plasma membrane or the cell membrane. The cell wall is present in plant cell, fungi, bacteria, algae, archaea, and plays important functions like protection, structure and the support. So this cell wall protects the entire organelles including the plasma membrane and the cytoplasmic matrix. It provides a specific structure to the cell and it supports the cell for its proper functioning. Now this cell wall is composed basically of carbohydrate polymer, that is cellulose, and though we call in basic characteristics the plant cell wall is cellulosic. So cellulosic cell wall is important characters of plant cell and the cell wall is made by cellulose. In case of bacteria, the cell wall contains the sugar and amino acid polymer, that is peptidoglycan, and in fungi the cell wall is of chitin, glucan and the proteins. Now this cell wall is multi-layered and it has three important components: middle lamella, primary wall and the secondary wall. In plant cell it has distinct middle lamella and primary cell wall and not well developed secondary cell wall. Now this is what is the structure of cell wall. So cell wall contains the middle lamella, outermost covering or layer is middle lamella, followed by middle lamella the primary wall and secondary wall. So secondary wall is multi-layer. It has three layers of secondary wall and on the inner side it has the lumen or the important internal component. This is another picture of cell wall. So we are observing here the middle lamella, which is the interconnection between the adjacent cell, and the cell is with intercellular spaces. So in between the adjacent cell the middle lamella is there, and as it is the outermost part of one cell and it has connection with the another cell, and these two cells are connected with each other with the help of important structure called as plasmodesmata. So again we can observe the middle lamella, then primary wall, then secondary wall, the plasma membrane, lumen and the intercellular spaces in the figure. This is one more picture of cell wall. So in the right hand side we can observe the histogram like image where the cell membrane on the inner side, next to the cell membrane there is secondary wall, third layer, second layer, first layer, then primary cell wall and the middle lamella. Now all these middle lamella, primary wall and secondary wall has its own composition, chemical composition. So middle lamella basically composed of polysaccharides and specifically the pectins, and these pectins helps in cell adhesion. That means it helps to connect, it helps in the interconnection between the cell. So it binds with the adjacent cell. The primary wall is next formed between the middle lamella and the plasma membrane. So on the inner side there may be plasma membrane, on the outer side there is middle lamella, and in between these the primary wall. This primary wall is composed again of cellulose, cellulosic microfibrils, hemicellulose fibers, and pectin. So composition of primary wall is cellulose, hemicellulose, and pectin, which provides strength and flexibility to the cell. Then the next one, secondary wall. It is between the primary wall and the plasma membrane. So secondary wall is not always present. It is, if present, it is between the primary wall and the plasma membrane. And once the primary wall stops dividing and when the cell growth is there, so this it may thicken and it forms the secondary wall. So that is why secondary wall is not present in all the cells, but it is present in the developing cell, whereby the primary wall get thickened and it produces the secondary wall, and it provides strength and support to the cell. The composition of secondary wall is cellulose and hemicellulose, and also the lignin. This lignin strengthened the cell. So this is what is about the outline, that is secondary wall, which is composed of cellulose, hemicellulose, and lignin. Primary wall is composed of cellulose, hemicellulose, and pectin, and middle lamella is made by pectin. So this is what is the chemical composition of the cell. Now when we go into the detail of ultrastructure of this cell wall, it has different compositions, that is, it has the pectin, it has the cellulose, it has the hemicellulose, and also some protein molecules. So this is how the ultrastructure of cell wall looks like. The middle lamella, outermost layer, followed by primary cell wall. In the primary cell wall, we can observe the pectins, then glycans and cellulose, and the plasma membrane on the inner side or beneath the cell wall. Now this structure, as it is made by cellulosic, and these cellulose which are most made by the glucose monomers or glucose molecules. So in detail, if we observe the ultrastructure of the cell wall, it contains basically the fibrils. These fibrils contains macrofibrils. The microfibril contains microfibrils. These microfibrils are made up of by several cellulose molecules. So this is what is the outline. Either we can take primary wall or the secondary wall. The primary wall, as it is made by cellulose or hemicellulose. These hemicellulose which are chain-like structures or linear structures. These hemicellulose combine together to forms a fibrils. These fibrils contains macrofibrils, then microfibrils, and then in the microfibrils there are number of elementary fibrils. These number of elementary fibrils are made by the cellulose molecules. So this is what is the cellulose chain, cellulose glucan chain. If we we see the picture of the cellulosic glucan chain, it is a linear or it is a straight. So when the cellulose is degraded with the help of enzyme like celluloses, enzyme of cellulase, and this degrade the chain, complex chain of cellulose, and a linear cellulose molecule or cellulose chain is formed, and in each of these cellulose chain is formed with the help of beta glucose monomers or glucose residues. This chemical composition of cell wall. So as we have discussed, the cell wall has the major composition of carbohydrate. Major component is the carbohydrate, and the components like cellulose, pectins, hemicellulose, proteins, and sometimes phenolics are also there in the cell wall. Each of these chemical substances have their role. So pectic acids, they are major component of middle lamella, and these pectic acids are made with the help of 100 galactouronic acid molecules, and these galactouronic acid molecules has the interconnections, or it forms a bridge between the calcium and magnesium ions. The second important component, that is pectin, it is the major component of middle lamella and also of primary wall. So pectin is made by about 200 galactouronic acid molecule, and compared to pectic acid, it is less hydrated and easily soluble in hot water. Then the next, celluloses. These are polymers of about 1000 to 10,000 D-glucose residues, and it is the major component of primary and secondary wall layers. Then starch, as the entire cellulose or entire cell wall has the major composition of carbohydrates, so the starch is also major component, and it is glucose molecules combined together to form starch. And in this there is one difference. So instead of beta 1,4 linkages, here the linkage is alpha 1,4, and because of this it forms a twisted configuration. So in the cellulose structure we can find the twisted molecules, and these molecules are generally branched. Including this, the hemicellulose. Hemicellulose, again a major component of primary cell wall, and the hemicellulose which has the major polysaccharide residues, and it has the major sugars like xylose, arabinose, and the mannose. These hemicellulose molecules are branched and hydrophilic, and they are abundant in primary wall and also found in the secondary walls. Including the carbohydrate residues, that is cellulose, hemicellulose, then pectin, pectic acid. It has other structural protein. Now here we can focus on the structural protein. So basically the proteins are either structural or functional proteins. Functional proteins have their role in synthesis of enzymes, or they act as an enzyme, and they have some functions, especially in the plasma membrane. And here the proteins which are present are the structural proteins, and they are mostly the glycoproteins, and the combination of carbohydrate and proteins which are involved in the structure of the cell wall. Also in cell wall protein, the amino acid like amino acid and hydroxyproline are abundant, and these are present in a primary wall layer. Now the cell wall has some important functions. Basically the major role of the cell wall is to provide framework to the cell, and helps to maintain the shape, and it has the connection between the adjacent cell. Including this, there are some additional function of the cell wall. It provides support. So this cell wall provides support and mechanical strength to the cell, and it also control the direction of growth, withstand turgor pressure. So turgor pressure, it is property related with the absorption of water. So when the turgidity in the water enters inside the cell, it increases the turgidity of cell, and this turgor pressure increase the turgidity, which create pressure on the cell, and that turgor pressure created inside the cell is withstand by the cell wall. It also helps to regulate growth. So the cell wall sends signal for cell cycle, and this cell through the cell cycle, cell divide and redivide, and they regulate the diffusion. So diffusion is one more property we have studied earlier. So in diffusion, the movement from higher concentration to low concentration, movement of anything, gaseous or solution or liquid or anything. So this movement, that is diffusion. So this cell wall also helps have their role in regulating the diffusion. Though the cell wall is not permeable, or it is not permeable, so the interconnection between the adjacent cell, that is plasmodesmata. So to plasmodesmata there may be exchange of material, and that either the entry of water or entry of the solutions, so that is regulated by the cell wall. Again, it has a role in communication. So cell communicate with the other cell with the help of plasmodesmata. So this plasmodesmata is interconnection between the adjacent cell. Protection, the cell wall protects the cell from the viruses or other pathogens, and it acts as a storage, because in the composition of cell wall we have studied the major composition of cell wall is the carbohydrate. So it acts as a storage of carbohydrate, and So this is what we have studied in this part. So I will just repeat the cell wall. It is important protective covering, and it protects, it also provides the structure, and it also provides the support. So major composition of cell wall is cellulose. In bacterial cell it is sugar, amino acid and peptide glycan, and in fungi it is chitin, glucans. It is multi-layered. It is composed of, it has 3 layers, that is middle lamella, primary wall and secondary wall. We have also discussed the structure of cell wall. The middle lamella, it is composed of pectin. Then primary wall, it is of pectin, hemicellulose and cellulose, and secondary wall it is of cellulose, hemicellulose and lignin. So this is how the cell wall looks in the ultrastructure. So it has, in the ultrastructure, the cellulose which forms the elementary fibers. Elementary fibers produces the microfibril. From the microfibril, macrofibrils are formed, and the finally fiber. So this is how it looks like. And the cellulose molecule, which is composed by several glucose monomers. So it is a linear chain. And in the cell wall, the major composition is cellulose, pectin, hemicellulose, proteins and phenolics. So these are all chemical substances which have a role in structure of cell wall, and the major important function is to provide framework and to maintain the shape. In addition to that, the cell wall has a role in support, withstand turgidity, regulate growth, regulate diffusion. It has role in communication, protection and storage.